Hello, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today we're going to talk about the fifth of the series of our NESARA Basics. Now, to give you a little bit of information, I want to share with you a little bit more about this. So again, we're going to, fill in a lot of the gaps here. Right up. So, we were talking about how the Fed was sublimated underneath the Treasury. And you go, wait a second, what happens? Okay, when you pay your money for your income tax, you pay it directly to the IRS, and the IRS pays it out to the Treasury just to make it legal. And then they pay it out to the Fed. Your money, the $3.3 trillion on average that comes out to the Fed, the first 6% of it goes out to the Fed bankers, those guys who are the governors of the bank. And the head dude gets set up, he's set up by the president. But by the way, every single president, other than Trump, every single president, actually his first event is to go right to the Fed first. It tells you who you're working for. I mean, the Fed is the people that come up with it. I think it's Volcker back in the 80s, and they were asking him a question. He was the Fed chairman in the 80s that was dealing with a massive amount of inflation of the time frame. And he was trying to reverse the inflation issues. And that's when interest rates went up pretty massively, and Reagan was trying to put his Reaganomics through. And he said, and some journalist was asking him a question, well, what about Reaganomics in essence? What about that? He goes, I don't care what they do in Washington. We're the one that make up the policy points on money. That tells you something pretty hard. They don't care what happens over here. But this is the first time of an event where we took the Fed and said, no, you don't get to do this. So when they get their money from the IRS, they take that and they give it to the first 6% just comes out to all the bankers. Now these bankers are central bankers throughout the world. They're all interconnected, these intersecting, interconnected banks. And one other person is in the middle of that. It's the Queen of England. And you go, why does she get any money? She's always gotten her money. If you go through, and there's a book by Dr. Rodney Howard-Brown, who's a pastor in Tampa Bay, and he's got this, or Tampa, sorry, and he's got a book which you need to listen to on Audible, and it's The Killing of Uncle Sam by Rodney Howard-Brown. And it's just a gorgeous book. It's a 1,000-page book, so it's kind of easier to listen to it on Audible because it's a gorgeous reader with it too. Now, he goes through some of this kind of stuff, and I went back and studied the history, not just from him, but other people when I figured this out. And you can also read the Creature at Jekyll Island, and that one actually kind of gives us an information about the Fed as well. Now, one of the things you have to know is that they get their money, and they're a foreign power that interacts with it, the Rothschilds. They're involved with this thing. They have control of all of this stuff. And then they even pay the interest payments on now $31 trillion. So they have the interest payments of that, and they're still taking off that before they send the money out. So it doesn't matter how much is on the Fed, and you think, well, that's our debt. It's not our debt. We didn't do anything to incur the debt. But that's how the Fed does it. They want you in debt. It's a debt bondage point. Now, one of the things that occurred, and this is what totally pissed off these elitists, is that when Trump came in, they knew the jig was up. In, I want to say it's November to December of 2017, he writes an executive order 13818. And it basically says that if you have crimes against humanity, he's going to take your property. And there's like 6 different ways that he kind of says that you can't borrow, you can't take it, you can't move, this kind of thing. By the way, almost all of these idiot corporate, big tech corporate ones that are really sick in the Epstein Island and all these other things what they did is they started getting a divorce. Go look at it. It's real fascinating. All of these guys are getting divorces so they can move the money over to the wife. Even Bezos was floating in the aisles, I think it was in 2019, and he's floating outside of Italy because he wants to get away. There's no getting away with this. Nothing can stop what's coming. It's fascinating. And it's because they were defunding these idiots from 2017 on. What Trump was doing is he set up the points of NESARA through that. Now, let me kind of explain what NESARA is in a really basic way. It comes from a Colorado area where these the Farm Bureau would come in, the Fed would come into these farmers and say, well, we refinance your loan, but you have to like sign a documentation. And what happened is this one guy named Roy Jr. with Roy Sr. Roy Sr. dies, and Roy Jr. comes in and goes, oh, I want to run the farm for my dad, or in my dad's name in essence, right? And they goes, no, he already signed over his farm to us. And so they were owning farm after farm after farm. And it's been going on for quite a while. And then what happened is Roy got a lawyer involved with this, and they kicked the butt of the Fed over and over again. And it generated this thing called NESARA, National Economic Stabilization and Reformation Act. Okay? NESARA isn't a word, it's just an acronym, or it's just an acronym that we use when we're talking about this. GESARA is the global thing. That's all the nations individually doing the same kind of thing for their own situation. Now, what that did is set up the event that they really wanted to accomplish, because the White Hats were coming after this issue. And I've been hearing about this whole event, the gold-backed currencies from 2010, but no one was really talking about NESARA. Very few people actually were talking about it at the time frame. But it was only about 2019, 2020 when we started to really see the uptick of this, because things were really happening. And it was, and the PPP loans through the CARES Act 2 was the generator issue. And one of the things you have to see is you look at the world and you say from 2020 to 2022, it went just completely off the rocker. Everyone has said that. I don't care if you're on the left or the right or the middle, whatever you feel like. Everyone knows that, even if you don't believe any of the kind of stuff I'm talking about here. And I pray that you're watching it now for the first time and going, what? That's why I'm trying to explain these little videos in a little bit easier bites to kind of catch. But what occurs here is that in 2020, from 2020 to 2022, by fractional increases. Now, I'm not going to get into that. It's how the banking does to increase the money flow. Through fractional increases, through inflation, and through just creation out of the blue, which is part of inflation, it's part of the fiat currency, of every piece of currency from 1913, from the initialization of the Fed, to 2022, 80% of every dollar that was created through their little sick means occurs in that 2-year time frame. 20% of every dollar digitally, fractionally, inflationally occurred from 1913 to 2020. When we talk about inflation, inflation used to include oil reserves and oil prices, but I do not remember 5-10 years ago, whatever it was, that they stole that thing and they pulled the oil point off. When Trump leaves office in January of 2020 or 2021, excuse me, inflation was kind of changed in that point, but there was plenty of gas flowing. I mean, so we had great gas flowing. So we think the number might be anywhere from 1.7. That's what the statement. I would say it's probably like 2 or 3%, but it's really close in that pretty close to that 1% kind of thing. Now, when we're talking in October of 2022 here, Biden, the idiot Biden's got it up at 9%. No, people go, it's not, oh, it's 8.3 and it's 9%. But if you add in the level of inflation with the historical numbers bringing in oil, we're up at 20%. Do you know that there are nations right now sitting at 90% inflation rates? And right now in Paris, people are trying to get fuel and they can only get 30 liters, which is what, 6 or 8 gallons or something like that. And they're running out of gas. I mean, they can't even get that number. It's worse than the 1970s or early 1970s oil crisis. There was a bankruptcy event. By the way, the Fed, when you run off of credit, you're always going to have an end date where you can't use it anymore. It's when you've been spending more than that you bring in, which means you're always in a negative situation with your budget because you're using your credit line to do this. Companies do this. Personal people do this, right? And they come to a bankruptcy event. Now, go backward into this little conversation that we had about Executive Order 13818. And in 13818 says that we're going to take the property of those who have crimes against humanity. You go look at the crimes against humanity against the elite, and it's massive. I can do it on 100 levels, including the election silliness and to the child trafficking and the treasonous events that they've done in many ways. That kind of stuff sets the whole stage for that. But when I first read this, and I remember talking to Santa Surfing, and when she and I were in good speaking terms at the time, but she and I were like talking about this. I'm like, what do you mean? I mean, taking the property. If the guy's like wealthy, doesn't he have to have his Manhattan property? So what? Take that one. I'll have another Manhattan property. No, what I realized about 6 months later was when I first read that, I think it was in 2020, what it was talking about is a bankruptcy event. Now, bankruptcy can be two different ways. Most people get real sideways on bankruptcy issues, so I'm going to leave with this one point. Bankruptcy can be either a reorganization or a closure. Now, most people just think of closure, but many times reorganization is exactly what they do. So one of the things that's going to happen with the Fed is going to go through a closure event. It's not going to have any control of anything anymore. Judy Shelton, who I think is the real Fed chairman in the future, she is going to be transitioning into the Treasury. Now she's going to work with, I believe, the Steve Mnuchin, not the idiot Yellen. She's a complete, utter moron, sicko. So you don't have to listen to moron and that stuff. You want to listen to Steve Mnuchin and Judy Shelton and what they're actually doing to kind of pull us in to a new situation here. Now, that's the closure event of you thinking about a bankruptcy. But what about the banks? Okay, so you have money at Chase and you have money at BOA or whatever bank, a big bank that you're talking about. Well, you can't close them and people lose all their money. And when I hear people say, you got to take all your money out of the banks, shut up, stop that, you're making me crazy. You're not going to steal all the money of the people in the banks. That is exactly what the St. Germain Fund and NESARA is doing. It's like, you're not stealing anything from them. We're going to have a basis of monies to move us over into gold standard. There's going to be a debt forgiveness that we'll talk about in a little bit here. And we're also going to see an ability to hold over the money, to take care of the people. If you want to get out of the big banks, go to a local bank. Okay, interview them just like you would interview a physician that you want to go see, or dentist. Get recommendations, all this different stuff. Talk to them and see what their policies and their desires are. But be in a local bank. Don't ask me what local bank. I don't know. You asked me about what local bank in Tacoma, Washington. I don't know. Look and identify. This is your own research that you need to do. It's your money. This is part of the event. I'm trying to help you with research, but you need to do your own research to figure out what bank you want to go to. Get away from the big banks, okay? It's not because they're just going to be closing, but when you see all the crud that they've been doing, consumer confidence is going to be in the toilet. That's the amazing part. So I hope that helps you. We'll talk more about the quantum financial system and other things Coming right up, okay?